Picture this. You're standing at the massive Vardhamana gate of the great city of Hastinapura. The air is just thick, right? Heavy with tension and sorrow. A royal family, literal heroes, known everywhere for their power and virtue, they're walking out of the city gates. But there's no grand parade today, no trumpets sounding their glory. They're not marching off to war. They have just been stripped of absolutely everything they own. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're digging into a really profound excerpt from the Aranyakaparva. We're going to see what happens when the ultimate fall from grace slams right into the true test of leadership, and how the people around us fundamentally shape who we are.
Okay, let's dive into this timeline, because honestly, the sheer speed of this downfall is staggering. Imagine being at the absolute peak of your life, affluence, power, respect. Then, in what feels like the blink of an eye, boom, it's all gone. It kicks off with this incredibly deceitful dice game, where the Pandavas are defeated by the sons of Dhritarashtra and their wicked counselors. They're incensed, they get mocked with some seriously cruel language, and suddenly they are just overwhelmed with misery. It's a rapid, shocking, whiplash sequence of events that forcefully kicks the Pandavas right out of their own kingdom.
Section 1. The Fall from Grace. The picture the text paints here is intensely dramatic. You've got King Yudhishthira, his heroic brothers, who, remember, are described as equal to the king of the gods in prowess, and their wife, the incredibly virtuous Draupadi. They're bearing their weapons and heading north. But they aren't surrounded by those grand armies or vast retinues anymore. They leave on swift cars, accompanied by Indrasena and a tiny staff. The text actually specifies they had only 14 servants with them. 14! From ruling the entire earth to a party of a few dozen, riding off into the unknown. And let's pause on that number on your screen, 12. This isn't some quick weekend retreat, you know? It's not a brief political exile that's going to blow over in a few months. This is a crushing 12-year exile into the deep forest. For these heroes who absolutely do not deserve this pain, who are used to the finest things in life, the reality of surviving in the unforgiving wilderness for over a decade must have felt totally insurmountable. You can just feel the sheer weight of those 12 years looming over their every single step.
Section 2. The Citizens' Rebellion. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this story isn't just about the royals. It's about the everyday people watching this all unfold. The citizens of Hastinapura are absolutely devastated. I mean, they are overwhelmed with sorrow watching the Pandavas leave. And they don't just sit back and weep in silence either. They gather together fearlessly and start loudly censoring the esteemed elders of the kingdom, powerful figures like Bhishma, Vidura, Drona, and Kortama. They're calling them out, blaming them for letting this massive injustice happen. It's a full-blown public outcry. And through the eyes of this terrified public, we get this stark comparison. They are terrified of the new ruler Duryodhana. They describe him as covetous, vain, mean, cruel by nature, bearing malice towards all his superiors and picking fights with his own blood. They're crying out that their families, their traditions, their virtue, and their prosperity are completely doomed under this guy. And on the flip side, you have the exiled Pandavas, merciful, high-minded, passions totally under control, modest and devoted to pious practices. So for the citizens, this isn't just new management moving into the palace. It's an apocalyptic shift from virtue to sheer toxicity.
Section 3. The Power of Association.
All of this fear prompts a pretty radical decision. The citizens declare that the whole earth is doomed with Duryodhana in charge. So what do? They refuse to stick around and live under a toxic leader. They physically abandon their homes, their city, their security, and they just chase after the Pandavas. They catch up to the sons of Kunti and literally beg to follow them wherever they go, desperate to escape the destruction they're sure is coming to the Kuru kingdom. And to explain why they're fleeing, they deliver this gorgeous 3,000-year-old metaphor. As cloth, water, the ground, and sesame seeds are perfumed by association with flowers, even so are qualities ever the product of association. I mean, think about that for a second. Have you ever been in a workplace where a toxic boss just ruined your entire week, changed your whole mood? The citizens recognize this fundamental human truth. We absorb the qualities of our surroundings, just like water absorbs the scent of flowers.
And that brings us to a core philosophical concept outlined in the text known as satsanga, essentially the principle of association. The citizens are arguing here that daily communion with the good and the wise naturally leads to the practice of virtue. On the flip side, association with fools produces an illusion that completely entangles the mind. They literally tell the Pandavas that the very sight, touch, converse, and association with dishonest people causes a huge drop in your own virtue. They aren't just scared that staying in Hastinapura will ruin their livelihoods, they're terrified it's going to ruin their actual character. By staying near the Pandavas, they hope to reap religious merit and keep their own minds pure.
Section 4. A True Leader's Choice.
Put yourself in King Yudhishthira's shoes for a minute. You've just been unjustly stripped of your kingdom. You're staring down the barrel of 12 brutal years in the forest. And suddenly, thousands of your adoring subjects show up, completely rejecting the new king and pledging their undying loyalty to you. Talk about the ultimate temptation, right? It's a ready-made rebellion handed to him on a silver platter. A lesser leader definitely would have capitalized on this mob to storm the gates and take the throne back by force. But Yudhishthira, he actually pauses the journey to address this massive crowd, and he rejects the rebellion. Instead of exploiting their anger, he displays incredible grace under pressure. He tells the people how blessed he feels that they credit him with such merits out of their affection, but he asks them to do one specific thing, and it is not to fight for him. He acts purely out of a deep sense of duty rather than political ambition, showing us that a true leader's responsibility definitely doesn't end just because their title got taken away.
So the crucial point is why he actually sends them back. He reminds the crowd of the incredibly vulnerable elders left behind in Hastinapura: grandfather Bhishma, King Dhritarashtra, Vidura, and most crucially, his own mother, Kunti. Yudhishthira begs these wailing citizens to go back to the city. He tells them, look, if you truly seek my welfare, if you really want to show me your best regards, you have to unite together, return to the city, and cherish these sorrowful relatives with care. He essentially entrusts these vulnerable elders to the citizens as pledges of his affection. It's just a masterful, completely selfless act that prioritizes the safety of his family way over his own ego.
Section 5. The First Night.
As the energy of the day begins to fade, things shift. The citizens, overwhelmed with sorrow but really moved by Yudhishthira's virtuous plea, unwillingly retrace their steps back to the city. Slowly, the noise of that massive crowd dies down. The Pandavas ascend their cars and push further into the wilderness. And as the day finally draws to a close, they reach the site of the mighty Pramona banyan tree, right on the banks of the river Ganges. This is where the sheer reality of their exile truly sets in. After purifying themselves in the sacred water, the text tells us that, afflicted with woe, they spent that night taking water alone as their sole sustenance. Just really think about that massive contrast. Literally the night before, they were royals in a palace with endless feasts. Tonight, their kingdom is a banyan tree, and their dinner is river water. It's a haunting image of austerity, and you can really feel the heavy, quiet grief of their first night in exile.
But even in this incredibly dark moment, they aren't entirely abandoned. Certain loyal Brahmanas had actually followed them out of deep affection and just refused to leave. As the evening becomes, in the beautiful words of the text, at once beautiful and terrible, these Brahmanas step up. First, they light their sacred sacrificial fires, gently pushing back the heavy darkness of the forest. Then, they begin to softly chant the Vedas and hold mutual converse. Finally, with what the text gorgeously describes as swan-sweet voices, they spend the entire night comforting that best of Kurus, King Yudhishthira, who somehow shines resplendent in their midst, despite having absolutely nothing. And this brilliantly illustrates the core lesson we pull from this ancient text. You look at Yudhishthira sitting by a fire, under a tree, drinking only water, yet he's still commanding the absolute love of his people and the deep reverence of the wise. It leaves us with a pretty profound question to ponder. Does true authority actually come from the throne you sit on, or is it the character you display when that throne is suddenly, forcefully taken away? As we've seen through the explainer today, power can vanish in a single dice game, but the fragrance of a virtuous character, that lingers, and it draws people in, no matter how dark the forest gets.